It was just another typical morning. The sun was barely rising, casting a warm golden hue over the streets as people hustled to start their day. She had a busy schedule, and the last thing on her mind was making any detours. She had always been a woman of routine, work, errands, and little else. But today, something unusual was about to happen. She noticed him as she drove past, an elderly man sitting by the side of the road in a wheelchair. His face was partially covered by a dark, weathered cap, and his hands rested on the arms of the chair, fingers slightly curled. He wasn't waving or asking for help, just staring ahead, appearing to be lost in thought. The sight tugged at something in her, though. She could tell he had been sitting there for a while, no one else in sight to help him. Something made her slow down. The faint feeling of guilt bubbled up inside her. She had always thought of herself as someone kind and considerate, but how many times had she seen people in need and kept driving, too busy to stop? Today felt different. Without thinking too much about it, she pulled over to the curb. The sound of her car's tires on the pavement was almost too loud in the quiet morning air. As she opened the door, she saw him look up at her, his expression unreadable, though his eyes seemed tired of waiting, tired of being alone. "Hey there," she said, offering a smile that she hoped didn't seem too forced. "Do you need a hand?" He didn't speak right away, but instead, he gave a small nod. It was as though he'd been waiting for someone to notice him for a long time. His voice was low but steady when he replied. "I could use a ride, if you don't mind." She hesitated for only a second, then quickly circled around the car to open the back door. The wheelchair was bulky, and it wasn't easy to lift him in, but somehow, she managed. The man didn't seem to weigh much, though his skin felt cold and his bones brittle. She adjusted the seat so he could rest comfortably before getting back into the driver's seat. "So, where are we headed?" she asked, trying to make small talk to fill the awkward silence. He gave her a faint smile. "I'll tell you when we're close." It wasn't much of a conversation after that. He didn't share much about himself, and she didn't ask. There was something about his presence that felt peaceful in a strange way. Maybe it was the years etched on his face, or the way he seemed to watch everything around him with a quiet understanding. She found herself occasionally glancing in the rearview mirror, catching his calm, steady gaze. As they neared a small building on the outskirts of town, he spoke again, his voice more urgent this time. "Pull over here." She did as he asked, parking at the side of the street. He looked out the window for a moment, his eyes scanning the area, then turned back to her. There was a strange intensity in his gaze that sent a chill down her spine. "Thank you," he said softly. "You've been kind to me." She smiled, though something about his words felt heavier than they should. "It was no trouble," she replied. "I'm glad I could help." He nodded, but instead of opening the door to leave, he paused. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice curious now. "I'm just an ordinary person," she said with a shrug. "But it's nice to meet you." He didn't ask for more details, but his eyes lingered on her for a moment longer than expected. There was something familiar about him, though she couldn't quite place it. And yet, when he finally wheeled himself out of the car, she didn't think much of it. She waved as he rolled down the sidewalk, vanishing into the morning light. The rest of the day went on like any other. She worked, ran errands, and hardly thought about the man in the wheelchair again. It was just another good deed, she told herself. Nothing extraordinary. It was a small act of kindness, and that was that. She had no idea how wrong she was. The next morning, however, everything changed. She was sitting at home when there was a knock at the door. It was early, and she had not been expecting anyone. When she opened the door, there stood a well-dressed man, his suit sharp, his expression serious. He didn't introduce himself right away, but instead handed her a business card. "I'm here on behalf of a client," he said. "May I come in?" Confused and a little taken aback, she stepped aside, allowing him to enter. He seemed so formal, out of place in her simple living room, as if he were a character in a story she had no part in. But there he was. I'm here because of an incident that occurred yesterday, the man began, his tone calm but somehow unsettling. You helped a gentleman, a man who has quite an important connection to something larger than you might realize. I have an offer for you, a life-changing one. Her heart skipped a beat. She had thought the whole interaction was over, a random act of kindness with no strings attached. But now, standing before her was a lawyer, offering something that could alter everything she knew. What did the man in the wheelchair have to do with this? And what exactly was she being offered? The tension in the room thickened. There was so much she didn't understand, and yet, she was about to find out. The lawyer took a seat, his expression never wavering. She stood frozen for a moment, trying to comprehend what was happening. Her mind raced, trying to piece together the encounter from the day before. It had felt so simple, a random, unremarkable act of kindness. She helped a man, offered him a ride, and sent him on his way. That was supposed to be the end of it. But here she was, facing a lawyer who seemed to be offering her something much larger than she could grasp. You're probably wondering what this is all about, the lawyer said, his voice calm, measured. I can assure you, it's important. But before I explain, I need to ask, do you remember the man you helped yesterday? The question made her pause. She had been so caught up in the unexpected nature of the situation that she hadn't really thought much about him after she dropped him off. The details seemed vague now, but she could still picture his face in her mind, tired, worn, and yet, there had been something almost serene about him. She nodded slowly, trying to focus. Yes, I remember him. He was in a wheelchair, looking like he needed some help. I gave him a ride to a building on the edge of town. But that was it. Nothing unusual. The lawyer nodded, as if expecting her answer. That man you helped isn't just any person, he said, his tone turning more serious. His name is not as important as the connections he has. The building you dropped him off at? That was just a small part of his world. She blinked, confused. What do you mean? He didn't seem like anyone important. The lawyer smiled faintly, as though he were trying to make her understand something she could hardly grasp. The man you helped is involved in something much bigger than you know. He is connected to a very influential family, and their influence reaches far beyond this town. His actions, as small as they might seem, are part of a much larger plan. The words hung in the air, heavy and incomprehensible. She had a million questions, but they all seemed to get stuck in her throat. Influential family? Larger plan? She could hardly believe what she was hearing. Was this some kind of joke? I don't understand, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know who he is, and I don't know what you're talking about. I just helped him. That's all. The lawyer leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as if he were weighing her words carefully. That's exactly why I'm here. You helped him. That simple act has now put you at the center of something that could change your life. The reason I'm here, offering you this opportunity, is because you've unknowingly become part of a plan that's been in motion for years. She could feel her pulse quicken. What kind of plan? The lawyer hesitated for a moment, clearly gauging how much to reveal. I can't say too much right now, but let's just say the man you helped is involved in an inheritance dispute. His family, an extremely wealthy and powerful family, has been in a bitter struggle over who controls their empire. This is where you come in. She shook her head, trying to process what he was saying. This all felt like something out of a movie, not her life. She was just an ordinary woman. Why would someone like her be part of something so grand? I still don't understand, she said, her voice trembling slightly. What does this have to do with me? The lawyer's expression softened, as if he finally realized how overwhelming this was for her. Because the man you helped is the key to everything. He's the one who has the power to settle the dispute. And now, you're being offered a position in the process. You can help bring everything to a resolution, and in return, you will be compensated in ways you can't even imagine. The words didn't make sense to her. How could a simple act of kindness have led to this? She was just a person trying to do something good for someone in need. She had no idea about the man's connections, no idea about the power struggles behind the scenes. And now, it seemed like her life was being turned upside down by something she couldn't understand. The lawyer stood up, placing the business card on the table in front of her. "Think about it carefully," he said. "This is an opportunity that doesn't come often. But you need to make a decision soon. The man, he won't be around forever. And the longer you wait, the more complicated things will get. You're in the position to change not just your life, but the lives of others." With that, he turned and walked out, leaving her sitting there in stunned silence. Her thoughts were a jumbled mess, spinning in a million different directions. What had she just agreed to? Was she really a part of something that could change everything? As the door clicked shut behind him, she sat there, staring at the business card in front of her. It all seemed so surreal. How had a simple act of kindness led to something so significant? What kind of power did this man hold? And most importantly, what would happen to her if she agreed to take the lawyer up on his offer? She didn't know the answers to any of those questions, but one thing was certain: her life was no longer going to be ordinary. "You said." The next few hours felt like they dragged on forever. She couldn't shake the lawyer's words from her mind. His voice echoed in her head, and the idea of being part of something bigger than herself left her both excited and terrified. She had been an ordinary person, living an ordinary life, and now, after helping one man, her reality was being shattered. At lunch, she sat alone in a quiet cafe, sipping coffee that had long gone cold. Her thoughts kept drifting back to the lawyer's visit. She knew she needed to decide whether to get involved, but how could she make such a huge decision when everything seemed so unclear? She didn't know the first thing about inheritance disputes or powerful families. She was just a woman with a good heart who had given a ride to someone in need. The more she thought about it, the more the lawyer's words started to weigh on her. "You're in the position to change not just your life, but the lives of others." What did he mean by that? What kind of power could a stranger in a wheelchair have? Why was this man so important? Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was a text message from the lawyer's office: "We're waiting for your decision. Please let us know if you'd like to proceed." She stared at the message for a long moment, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She had been hoping for more time to think, more clarity, but it seemed the universe wasn't going to give her that luxury. She needed to decide now. After a long pause, she typed a response: "I'll meet with you tomorrow. I'm ready to hear more." She pressed send before she could second-guess herself. The next day, she arrived at the lawyer's office early. The building was grander than she expected: tall, glass windows, sleek modern architecture. It looked like something out of a movie, and for a moment, she felt out of place. She was just a woman from a small town, sitting in the lobby of a law firm that seemed to belong to a world far removed from hers. When the lawyer finally appeared, he greeted her with a polite smile, ushering her into his office. The room was equally impressive: expensive furniture, a large wooden desk, and bookshelves stacked high with legal tomes. But despite the opulence, there was a coldness to it, a formality that made her feel small. "Thank you for coming," the lawyer said, gesturing for her to sit. "I know this is a lot to take in, but I want you to understand the gravity of the situation. This isn't just about you and the man you helped, it's about an entire legacy." She nodded, still unsure of where this conversation was going. "I just don't understand. What exactly are you offering me?" The lawyer smiled again, but this time, his expression softened. "You've already done something important by helping him. Now, we're asking for your continued involvement. Your role would be relatively simple. All you need to do is agree to stand by his side in this dispute. With your help, the family will be forced to recognize his worth." Her mind raced. Stand by his side? The man in the wheelchair? What did that even mean? What kind of dispute was he caught in, and why was she being asked to get involved? "Why me?" she asked, her voice quieter now. "Why not someone else? I'm just a stranger to him." I don't even know who he is." The lawyer's face grew serious, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something deeper, something that hinted at the stakes involved. "Because, as I said before, you're not just a stranger. You're the one who saw him. You saw his humanity, his need. That means something. And that's what will make a difference in this case. The family will respect you, because you're the one person who treated him like he mattered." She felt a pang of discomfort in her chest. Was that it? Was she really just a pawn in a game she didn't understand? But then again, it wasn't like she could turn back now. She had already been pulled into this world. "I can't promise I'll be any help," she said, feeling a mixture of doubt and responsibility. "But if you think I can make a difference, I'll try." The lawyer gave a small nod, his lips curling into a satisfied smile. "That's all we need. You'll be briefed on the details soon, but for now, I'll let you go. Rest assured, this is only the beginning." The next few days were a blur of meetings, documents, and unfamiliar terms. She found herself thrust into a world of high-stakes legal drama, learning more about the family involved, the inheritance, and the man she had helped. It was all too much, too fast, and she couldn't keep up. But there was one thing she knew for sure: she had made a choice, and now there was no going back. The man in the wheelchair was more than just a stranger. His life, his family, and everything he had been through were intertwined with her own life in ways she could never have imagined. She still didn't fully understand why she had been chosen for this, but one thing was clear: she was in this for the long haul. Whether she liked it or not, her fate was now connected to his, and she had to see it through. Days turned into weeks, and the more she learned about the situation, the more overwhelming it became. The man she had helped wasn't just a helpless, elderly man in a wheelchair, he was part of something far more complex. His family, a name that had once meant nothing to her, was a powerful force in the business world, an empire built on decades of influence, wealth, and secrecy. She spent hours reading through legal documents, financial reports, and family histories. Each piece of information revealed more about the family's past, but also about the man she had helped. His name had been kept hidden from public knowledge for years, his identity buried under layers of secrecy. But through her involvement, she learned that he was the heir to a massive fortune, a fortune that was currently up for grabs in the ongoing inheritance dispute. The more she uncovered, the more questions she had. Why had he been kept away from the family for so long? What had happened to make him the outsider? And why had he chosen her, of all people, to help him? She wasn't anyone special. She had no connections, no power, no experience with things like inheritance disputes or legal battles. She was just a woman who had helped a stranger. And yet, here she was, in the middle of something that was beyond her comprehension. One afternoon, as she was going through more documents in her living room, the doorbell rang. She wasn't expecting anyone, so she hesitated before answering. When she opened the door, there stood the man in the wheelchair, the one she had helped that fateful morning. He was dressed in a long coat, his face as unreadable as ever. But there was something different about him today. His expression was no longer weary. There was a spark in his eyes, a quiet confidence that made her heart race. "I thought you might need some answers," he said softly, as if reading her mind. "You've been learning about me, haven't you?" She nodded, feeling a mix of surprise and confusion. "I've been going through everything. But it's so much to take in. I don't understand why this is all happening. Why me? Why now?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he wheeled himself inside, as if he had every right to be there. He didn't seem to care about the small details, about her confusion, or about the questions she still had. There was a calmness in his demeanor, as though he had accepted his fate a long time ago. "You're probably wondering why I'm doing this," he finally said. "Why I came to you. The truth is, I've been waiting for someone like you. Someone who could see beyond the surface. Most people, when they see me, they just see an old man in a wheelchair. They don't see the truth. They don't see the family I came from, the legacy that's at stake, or the power I've been denied for so long. She blinked, unsure how to respond. Her mind was reeling with all the new information. She had barely scratched the surface of what he was saying, and yet, she already felt like she was in too deep. "I don't know anything about legacies or power," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I'm just a regular person. I'm not qualified for this. I don't even know if I'm the right person to help you." The man smiled, his gaze softening. "That's exactly why I chose you. You're not driven by ambition, or by greed. You're not here because of what you can gain, but because you cared enough to stop and help a stranger. That's rare. That's why I trust you." His words hung in the air, heavy and full of meaning. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, but at the same time, doubt gnawed at her. How could she, an ordinary woman, be trusted with something so important? How could she possibly have a role to play in a family dispute that had the potential to change everything? "You've learned about my family," he continued, his voice steady. "But there's something more I need to tell you. Something you won't find in those documents. I've been estranged from them for years. They wanted me gone, erased from their history. But I'm still here. And I've been fighting for what's mine, for what should have been mine all along." His words struck a chord deep within her. There was pain in his voice, but also a sense of resolve, as if he had been fighting this battle for so long that he had finally come to terms with his place in the world. She didn't know the full extent of his story, but she could feel the weight of it. This wasn't just about money or power, it was about family, legacy, and the long road to redemption. She wanted to ask him more, to understand what had happened, but the words wouldn't come. She knew he wasn't ready to share everything just yet, and she respected that. But she also knew that she couldn't walk away from this. Not now. Not after everything she had learned. "All right," she said quietly, her voice more certain than she felt. "I'll help you. I don't know what I'm supposed to do, but I'll help you however I can." He nodded, his expression unreadable. "That's all I need for now. We'll take this one step at a time." As he left her home that evening, the weight of her decision settled in. She had agreed to help him, but the road ahead was still unclear. What did all of this mean for her? What would it mean for the family, for the legacy that had been hidden for so long? She didn't know the answers, but she did know one thing: her life would never be the same again. The next few days felt like they blurred together, one long, restless stream of decisions and uncertainties. After the man left her home, she spent the night pacing, thinking, and second-guessing her choice to get involved. Her heart was torn between the feeling that she was part of something much bigger than herself and the fear that she had made a huge mistake. She was an ordinary person, and now, her life was connected to a tangled web of wealth, power, and family secrets. She had no experience in these matters, no idea what the right move was. But deep down, she knew she couldn't turn back. Her thoughts kept drifting back to his words: "You're not here because of what you can gain, but because you cared enough to stop and help a stranger." It made sense. He trusted her because she had shown him compassion, something the people in his life, his family, had long since taken for granted. But she also knew that trust came with a heavy responsibility, one she wasn't sure she was ready to bear. The lawyer had explained the basics of the dispute, the inheritance that was at stake, the fractured family that had been torn apart over years of power struggles. But what he hadn't explained was how dangerous this battle had become. What lengths would people go to for control? What risks was she being asked to take? As much as the lawyer had reassured her that everything would be fine, there was still a gnawing feeling in her gut that told her this wasn't going to be an easy ride. She tried to get back to her normal routine, but nothing felt normal anymore. The phone calls, the emails, the endless paperwork, it was all part of a world she didn't belong to. She spent hours trying to understand the legal jargon, but it seemed like a foreign language. Her mind would often wander to the man in the wheelchair, wondering where he was and what his next move would be. But more than that, she wondered about the family he came from, the people who had turned their backs on him, who saw him as a threat rather than a member of their legacy. And then, one morning, she received an email that shook her to her core. It was from the lawyer, with an urgent subject line, "Your decision is crucial." The email detailed an upcoming meeting, a final chance for her to reconsider her involvement before everything went public. They needed her to be at the meeting, but it was clear that this was no longer just about helping someone in need. It was about choosing a side, making a commitment, and stepping into a battle where there would be no turning back. She stared at the screen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Was she really ready for this? Could she handle the weight of the choices she was being asked to make? If she said no, would she be walking away from a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity? Or would she be protecting herself from a world of danger and intrigue that could ruin her life? The question seemed to hang in the air, suffocating her. She had always lived her life by avoiding drama, by keeping things simple. But here she was, standing at the edge of something much bigger than she could have imagined. Was this really the path she wanted to take? Or had she already crossed the point of no return? She took a deep breath and made her decision. She responded to the lawyer's email, confirming that she would attend the meeting. There was no turning back now. She didn't know what she was walking into, but she knew she couldn't walk away. Not after everything she had learned, not after seeing the look in the man's eyes when he trusted her. As the day of the meeting approached, she felt the weight of her decision pressing down on her. The meeting wasn't just about the inheritance anymore, it was about choosing her place in this new world, a world where the stakes were high and the consequences of failure were unimaginable. The night before the meeting, she couldn't sleep. Her mind raced with questions. What would they ask of her? Would she be able to do what was required of her? And more importantly, what would happen if she failed? The man in the wheelchair had trusted her, and now, it felt like she was being asked to carry the burden of his future on her shoulders. The weight was heavy, but she knew there was no turning back. She had made her choice. As the sun began to rise, she prepared herself for the day ahead. There was no going back. Tomorrow would be the beginning of a new chapter in her life, one that she couldn't yet comprehend. But she was ready. At least, she hoped she was. The day of the meeting arrived. She dressed in her best clothes, though they felt out of place on her. Everything about this situation felt out of place. But she wasn't going to back out. She would see this through. She had to. When she arrived at the office, the lawyer was already waiting for her. His expression was serious, and the moment she walked through the door, she could feel the gravity of the situation. "Glad you could make it," the lawyer said, offering a brief nod. "This is it. The meeting will determine the next steps. Are you sure you're ready?" She nodded, though inside, her heart was pounding. There was no turning back now. She had already committed, and the only way forward was through. The room was filled with people she had never met, all wearing expensive suits, their faces unreadable. And then, there he was, the man in the wheelchair, sitting at the head of the table, his calm demeanor belying the power he seemed to hold. As she took a seat at the table, she realized that this was the moment where everything would change. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about something much bigger, something that she could only begin to understand. And whether she was ready or not, she was now part of it. The room was tense as she sat down, the weight of the situation pressing in on her. The man in the wheelchair sat at the head of the table, his calm demeanor offering little clue as to the storm that was about to unfold. Around the table, the faces of the others were set in stern, unreadable expressions, high-powered lawyers, business executives, and family members who appeared to have come to this meeting with their own agendas. The air was thick with anticipation. She had never felt so out of place. These were people who lived and breathed power, influence, and money, worlds away from her simple life. But despite her nerves, she knew she had a role to play, and she couldn't back out now. The man in the wheelchair had trusted her, and she couldn't betray that trust, no matter how overwhelming this moment felt. The lawyer who had been guiding her throughout this process stood beside her, his voice firm and professional. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, addressing the room. "We are here today to settle the matter of the inheritance, to bring clarity to the dispute that has torn this family apart for far too long. And as we all know, The key to resolving this lies in the testimony of one person, someone who has witnessed the truth that others have tried to conceal. Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't known what to expect from the meeting, but hearing those words made everything feel more real. The truth. The hidden story. She suddenly felt the weight of it all, the expectations, the responsibility, and the fear of what might unfold. One of the men sitting across the table, a sharp-dressed individual with cold eyes, leaned forward. "Are you suggesting that this woman," he gestured toward her, "is in a position to influence the outcome of this dispute? That she, someone who barely knows our family, has the power to decide our fate?" The words stung, but she didn't let them show. She had prepared for this moment where her presence would be questioned, where her worth would be scrutinized. But the truth was, she wasn't here to decide anyone's fate. She was here because the man in the wheelchair believed in her, and that was something she couldn't ignore. The lawyer beside her didn't flinch at the man's challenge. Instead, he responded calmly, "What she witnessed on that day is a pivotal part of the larger picture. It's not about influence, it's about the truth coming to light. This is not just a matter of inheritance, it's about accountability, the acknowledgement of a life that has been hidden for too long." The man in the wheelchair, who had remained silent up until now, spoke for the first time. His voice was steady, his words deliberate. "For years, my family chose to erase me from their narrative. But now, they will see the consequences of that choice. I am not a ghost, and I will not be dismissed. I am here to claim what's rightfully mine, and I'm not alone. The woman you all question has already shown more compassion than any of you ever did." There was a murmur around the room. The family members shifted uncomfortably, some looking away, others exchanging furtive glances. She could sense the discomfort, the growing tension. She had stepped into a battlefield, and she wasn't sure if she was equipped to fight it. But there was no turning back now. A woman sitting at the far end of the table, whose sharp features and icy demeanor reminded her of a high-ranking executive, spoke up. "You've been gone for years. You think you can just waltz in and claim what you lost? The empire you want to control isn't just handed to anyone, it's built on years of blood, sweat, and strategy." The man in the wheelchair didn't flinch at her words. "I'm not here to take control. I'm here to take what's mine. What should have been mine from the beginning." His gaze then shifted toward her, as if seeking reassurance. She met his eyes, nodding ever so slightly, offering him the quiet support he needed. For a moment, the room fell into silence. The faces around the table were a mixture of disbelief, anger, and confusion. But there was something else in the air now, uncertainty. No one had expected this. No one had expected him to come back, to claim his place, to fight for what he had been denied for so long. The tension in the room was palpable. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing in on her chest. This wasn't just a legal battle, it was a personal one. And somehow, against all odds, she was a part of it. A part of a fight that was bigger than she could have ever imagined. The lawyer spoke again, his voice low but firm. "Let's not forget what's truly at stake here. This isn't about pride or ego. This is about a legacy, about rectifying years of neglect and injustice. The woman you're questioning is the only person who can help us bring that to light. We all have our roles to play in this. And now, it's time for her to speak." The room went still, every eye turning toward her. The moment had arrived, the moment where she would have to stand up and speak her truth. But what could she say? What did she truly know? She was just a witness, a person who had helped a stranger on a single day, but as she took a deep breath, she realized something. It wasn't about knowing all the answers. It wasn't about having the perfect plan. It was about doing what she believed was right. With a steady voice, she began, "I don't know everything. I don't have all the answers. But what I do know is that I saw a man in need. And I helped him, because that's what any decent person would do. I wasn't expecting anything in return. I wasn't looking for power, or money, or any kind of reward. I simply saw someone who mattered. And when I saw him again, I realized how much more was at stake. This isn't just about money or a family dispute. It's about something deeper, the need for justice, for recognition, for what's rightfully his. Her voice faltered for a moment, but she pressed on. I'm here because I believe in what's right. And I believe that the man I helped has been denied his place for too long. The silence that followed felt like an eternity. No one spoke, no one moved. It was as if her words had hit a nerve, shaking something deep within them all. For the first time, she saw cracks in their hardened exteriors. Perhaps, just perhaps, they were starting to understand. Finally, the man in the wheelchair spoke, his voice filled with quiet determination. It's time to make things right. And in that moment, she knew that she had made the right choice. The next few days felt like a blur, an overwhelming whirlwind of emotions and decisions. The room where the family had gathered that day lingered in her mind, the tension, the unspoken words, the finality in the man's voice as he declared his intent to reclaim his rightful place. She had stepped into a world that felt alien to her, a world filled with power struggles, hidden truths, and long-forgotten legacies. She had never expected any of this, but now, it was clear that her life had irrevocably changed. In the days following the confrontation, things moved quickly. The family members, despite their earlier resistance, started to realize the gravity of the situation. The man in the wheelchair, once dismissed and erased from their history, was now at the center of a story they couldn't ignore. It wasn't just about inheritance anymore, it was about justice, recognition, and acknowledging the human cost of years of neglect. The lawyer worked tirelessly behind the scenes, pushing the legal processes forward. As the case gained traction, the media began to take notice. The story of the man who had been kept hidden from his family, only to return and claim what was rightfully his, caught the public's attention. It wasn't just a legal battle, it was a human story, one of resilience, perseverance, and redemption. For the woman who had helped him, it was a strange mix of emotions. She had never sought out fame or recognition. She had simply done what she thought was right, what anyone would have done. And yet, now her name was being mentioned in connection with a story that was capturing the nation's attention. People were curious about her, about the woman who had helped the man in the wheelchair, about what had driven her to do so. Her life had become intertwined with his, and there was no going back. Despite the growing media attention, she remained focused on the bigger picture. It wasn't about the cameras or the interviews, it was about the man who had trusted her, the man who had fought for his place in a world that had tried to forget him. It was about the legacy that was being rewritten, not just for him, but for everyone involved. As the weeks passed, things began to fall into place. The inheritance dispute, once a bitter and drawn-out battle, reached its resolution. The man's family, reluctant at first to acknowledge him, began to see the undeniable truth: he was not just a forgotten member of the family. He was the rightful heir, the one who had been denied everything that was rightfully his. And, perhaps more importantly, he was the person who had the strength to stand up to the forces that had kept him in the shadows for so long. The family, though reluctant to accept him, had no choice but to recognize the undeniable reality. They agreed to a settlement, a resolution that would allow the man to take his place within the family, and to finally receive what he was owed. But it wasn't just about the financial gain. For the man in the wheelchair, it was about something deeper, something that could never be measured in dollars or assets. It was about reclaiming his dignity, his identity, and his place in a world that had long forgotten him. For the woman who had helped him, the journey was just as transformative. She had started out as a simple stranger, someone who had shown kindness to a man in need. But in the process, she had discovered something within herself. She had discovered her own strength, her own capacity for courage and conviction. She had become part of something much bigger than herself, something that changed her life in ways she could never have anticipated. The day the settlement was finalized, the man in the wheelchair came to visit her once again. This time, his expression was different, softer, more at peace. He thanked her for everything she had done, for standing by him when no one else would. "You didn't just help me get what was mine," he said quietly, his voice full of gratitude. "You gave me something that I didn't know I needed. You gave me my dignity back." And for that, I'll always be grateful. She smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest that words couldn't fully capture. It had never been about the reward. It had always been about doing the right thing, about standing up for someone who had been forgotten. As he left her home that afternoon, she stood at the door, watching him wheel away into the distance. She didn't know what the future held for either of them, but she knew that this was the end of one chapter, and the beginning of a new one. In the weeks that followed, life returned to a sense of normalcy. But for both of them, the world had irrevocably shifted. She had helped him, and in doing so, had found a purpose that went beyond anything she had ever imagined. She had changed his life, yes, but in the process, he had also changed hers. And as she looked back on everything that had happened, one thing was certain: the world was filled with stories that no one could predict, and sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness could lead to the most unexpected and life-altering outcomes. In the end, the most important lesson was this: sometimes, the right thing to do is the simplest thing. It's not about seeking recognition, or fame, or reward. It's about seeing someone in need and stepping forward without expectation. Because in doing so, you may just change someone's world, and in the process, change your own. The end.